Welcome to our meeting today, our session today. Our theme is computational thinking, and we're going to have a conversation about that. But we're going to start with Paula and I think colleague, talking about the work they're doing, and it fits perfectly. I mean, this week just worked out perfectly with Paula talking about her project and then moving into the computational thinking discussion. So, and on the agenda, don't forget to highlight your library. And also there's links to a couple of different things. One I just linked to this morning, which flows from what Paula is going to talk about. So Paula, are you ready?
Sure. Okay.
You're on.
I can do this, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're gonna talk. Let me start the timer. Okay, so DC Public Library, we are doing a program called Ready, Set, Think, Computational Thinking for Kids. So computational thinking is sort of all we're doing. Today, there are a couple of my other colleagues, other people from GCPL who are doing this program with me. A little background, how we got into this is when the grant application period opened, I was started to think about what DC does really well and what we really need to work on. And one of the things we do really, really well is our early literacy component. We have something called STAR, which is Think, Talk, and Read. We do workshops for parents about how to encourage early literacy where we give them material. We have a festival every year. We started a program called Books from Birth that we partnered with the Imagination Library, I think is what it's called, from Dolly Parton. And we send a free book to every kid born in DC who's signed up for the program between the ages of birth and 5. So we do early literacy really, really well. When I was looking at the coding programs and what we could do, I really wanted to build on that background. So we ended up with this, where we're teaching or exploring computational thinking with kids and that next step up, age group 5 to 7, 5 to 8-ish. So how we're doing this is we have one-off programs at 4 different locations. This is our second round of this, where they're basically about an hour, hour and a half. We do an introduction with an icebreaker. And one of the things we do in the icebreaker is we talk around CT, but I don't know that we actually use the term computational thinking. I have to remember back. And I think I did in the first couple, and then I stopped because I got a lot of blank looks. And I thought, well, we don't need to use big academic language to talk about this. We can still talk about it without using that phrase. So we do the instructions, then we have 4 activity stations that we move around we spend about 10 minutes each at each station. And so we explore 4 components of computational thinking. Algorithm design, which is maze in the bottom left-hand corner. They have sort of command movement cards. They get a grid, and then they can use found objects in the library and their home to create a maze and move around it. And the algorithm, the maze is actually pretty cool because there's a lot of scaffolding that can happen with it. So you can use the cards and put them directly onto the maze to move around. You can also lay them down one at a time in front of you. So lay a card down, move your piece, lay a card down, move your piece. Or you can do a lot more forward thinking and more abstract thinking where you have to lay out the entire movement first in front of you with the cards and then try the maze to see if you can get through it. And then if you can't get through it, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to do some debugging and iteration and try it again and again. In the sort of center-ish, sorry, go ahead.
Paula, I think that one it starts out a little complicated on the surface, but I think it ended up being one of the kids' favorite games because you could scaffold it, and there were a lot of different variants you could do with the pieces you just had in front of you. So that was a really fun game that the kids really enjoyed.
Yeah. That's Patricia, who is one of my coworkers. In this center, we have pattern recognition, which is based on the game set. So there's a whole pack of cards where you have 4 variables on them: the number of objects, the color of object, the type of shape, and the shading of it. And so we ask kids to find characteristics that cards have in common. So either 2 characteristics, 3 characteristics, or 4 characters. 2 characteristics or 3 characteristics. Can't have 4 characteristics in common. So only four of them. And create packs. And it's really interesting to see how quickly kids are able to pick up on finding those similarities between them, figuring out what can be made into a pattern, and then actually listening to them talk about it. And the language they use, it's been really interesting to do that, because there are some kids who they'll miss something like the shading, but when you ask them, you know, when you try to prompt them, or when I try to prompt them and say they have one thing else in common, it's usually like they get responses like they're both shapes, or they both have numbers. There's certain, you know, they all have more than one, or something like that. So it's kind of interesting the other patterns and characteristics they are finding between them, which sort of leads into abstraction and the essentialism. What is essential on each card and in each set, each grouping. And that's what I think kids have fun with. It's not been a favorite game all over, but I think it's really helpful. And the parents seem to really like it too, because it's something that you can play for a short period of time or a long period of time. Then we have the shoelace tying game. We've talked a little bit about decomposition. It ends up being really hard, but I think that's one of the things that makes it kind of fun. And then at the bottom, we have abstraction, which is something that we, as the people who are presenting the program, have sort of struggled with how to put together and present this. After we do go through these 4 activities, we have a focus group for adults talking about this programming and what else they would like to see from DCPL. For the kids, we do a talkback board, and we have started this round. We are serving food. We're doing a box lunch for everyone who comes to sort of create and focus community. And then each family who comes gets a packet of all of this material, as well as a parent handout explaining computational thinking and these 4 components, as well as other activities they can do to support it beyond these games. Okay, so what we've learned is that a lot of the families who come have younger children who really can't use this material. They're way too young for that. So having material available in the same space for them as well, like Dupo blocks, and other stuff, works really well. The rotating stations work really well, so that if a kid gets bored or frustrated with one activity, they're only there for 10 minutes. So it's very easy to move around to the next one. It's really helped with our community, focusing on the communities and building community and sort of a background for this stuff. Especially with the marketing, we've really sort of found different communities that we can target with our programming. We figured out that you need at least 2 people, staff, to work these events, especially because of the 4 tables, and to sort of scaffold the interactions. And the other thing we learned, I mean, we sort of already know this, it's part of why Ready to Code happens, is that there are a lot of families looking for free tech programs that can support their kids, which is pretty fun. What we still are working on. So one of the things is abstraction, and how to talk about and explore abstraction in a way that makes sense to kids who maybe they may not be old enough to really understand abstraction. So the first game we played was a version of Pictionary that I think it worked. The kids sort of liked it, and I think it worked with younger kids, and we ended up with older kids, and it was not abstraction at all. We're trying a new game this round where we're asking kids to build things and then we're asking them to make a table out of paper and then talk about why and how that's a table, which is a form of abstraction. We've only done 1 session so far in the new group, and it didn't work so well. So it's going to be interesting to see whether or not that works in the other sessions. I'd be really excited to see if you guys have any suggestions for how to talk about abstraction with younger kids. We also need to look at and think about how to introduce the actual phrase computational thinking and pull that, I think, more into the program as opposed to just talking around it. And then the other thing we're looking at is how do we build this program systematically throughout the system? How do we encourage and train additional staff members and provide them with the information to provide the programs, but then also sort of support all the things that we were talking about in the framework. We've been looking at the framework a lot, the group of us, and where we each individually fall in that, where this program falls in that, and where the system falls in that, and how we can move both individuals in the system, but also the system as a whole sort of through that process. Okay, I'm about at time. So I'm going to stop sharing, but if you guys have any questions, okay. Are there any questions about that?
I just want to ask too if people have thoughts about abstraction, because as Marika knows, that one's hard for me too, just to say, to like describe. And so I think that working with youth, that can definitely be difficult, youth and families, but any of the pieces. Thanks, Paula, that was great. Juan is interested in the shoelace tying.
Sure. So for the shoelace exercise, we're trying to sort of target 4 people at each station. So we have 4 shoes at the station and 4 shoelaces. And then each station also has instructions on it. We ask them to use their shoe to demonstrate how everyone can tie a shoe. So how you can lace and then tie a shoe. Which is more difficult to use words than you think, especially because in the instructions and the staff member who is sort of with that area talks about, well, which hole do you mean, what part of the shoe are you looking at, where is the toe, what is the toe, and sort of the different pieces of it. And then so you lace it up and then you try to tie it. That usually takes more than 10 minutes, so we usually get part of the way through it. And then ask them, lace them for the next set and then move through. But each person who comes, is able to take home that material and keep working on that specific problem, but then also hopefully other different ways to look at decomposition overall. Does that help?
Yeah, so you give them a set of instructions and then they follow those instructions to tie the shoe.
Yes, that is the hope.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so recruitment, Marika's asking about. So we picked some branches that are in, DC is a very stratified city. I think a lot of cities are very stratified, but we're also very, wealth is very concentrated in one part of the city. There's gentrification happening everywhere, so that will not be true moving forward probably. But we picked 4 locations for the first set and 4 locations for the second set. One of them is in a fairly middle class, upper class neighborhood, and the other 3 are in underrepresented communities. And how we picked the branches is I put a call out to all of the libraries and to all of the staff saying, we're doing this program, who wants to do it? Who wants to work on this? And we sort of, I did target specific areas, and call those locations to ask them specifically, would you like to do this? Would you like to be involved in this? And Patricia, who you heard talk, is at Capitol View at one of those locations. Amy, who is also here, is at another, she's in sort of a middling location. It's in the process of being gentrified. And then one of the other locations, Francis Gregory, is in an underrepresented area. Oh, yes. So the 4 locations for the first set was Petworth Library in the Petworth neighborhood, Capitol View Library, which is east of the river in Ward 7, Francis Gregory Library, which is also in Ward 7, and Woodridge Library, which is in Ward 5 and in the gentrifying area. And then in this last round, we're also going to do it at the Chevy Chase Library, which is one of the more affluent areas of the city.
Any other questions, comments, suggestions? Marika?
Oh, you're muted.
Me?
No. Marika is. I can see your mouth moving, but.
Maybe she doesn't have a question. Is she typing it in? Marika's typing it in. Oh, you can't unmute yourself? Oh, sorry. Oops. Sorry. Are you unmuted now? I don't know which phone is you. Are you unmuted now?
I'm unmuted. Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's where I'm in two places. Sorry. So I'm going to start asking this question, I think, of everybody, because I'm really curious about the recruitment and the reach of the programs. So Paula, are you seeing, so I know this is a new program in these branches, but are you seeing families that come to your other programs in this, or are you reaching new families too? Is that clear what I'm trying to ask?
It is, and I will actually ask Patricia if she wants to answer this, because at her location, when we did between the first time we did the program and the second time we did the program, we increased the participation by like 3 times. So I don't know, Patricia, did you see new families for this?
Sorry, it was telling me to unmute. I needed to press *6. Yes, we have seen, especially one of the families come back and they have been participating in other activities that we have going on here. I think one of the interesting things about our branch is that we are newly renovated. We've only been reopened for about 4 or 5 months now. So it's been a really nice touch to bring this program here and get the word spreading about all of our other library programs. So I think bringing the families in for this program in particular has led us to have other families, or some families from that program join us for other programs here at this branch, which is great because we're, looking to bring in more people since we just reopened.
And I believe Erin, who was sort of working with us at the Francis Gregory Library, also said that she saw families. We haven't done the second program there yet. That will be in 2 weeks. But she saw families for that initial first program that she had never seen before. So we are seeing new families. This is, we've done maker programming, and there are some libraries who have done some version of robotics coding very briefly and not, I wouldn't say well publicized. I mean, I don't know about them overall, but this is sort of a new area for us in general, especially systematically beyond a maker.
This is Carmen Boston, and I don't know, yeah, you can hear me. I just want to say that Paula introduced this program to all librarians back in the fall by doing a workshop with them to explain computational thinking. So that was one thing she forgot to mention that she did.
All right. Thank you, Paula. That was awesome. And, I think as we keep having this conversation today on computational thinking, we may come back to some of what you said and have more questions. So I'll move us on to the main topic, which, like I said, fits perfectly. And this has come up, a few times. And last week, Paula and Claudia finally said, we have to talk about this. So we are. So the focus is computational thinking. And when the team talked about how we were going to frame this today, we thought that we would start with looking at a definition of computational thinking, but we really want to think about what computational thinking is, but then think about that whole idea of the why of libraries and computational thinking and how you talk about it with others, which definitely relates to what Paul was saying, how you talk about it with others from your colleagues at your library to other people who work with youth, to parents, to teachers, to whoever. So I think there's two things we're trying to get at, and we have these questions here, and the definition from Jeanette Wing that is, we think is pretty simple and does a good job with just giving a basic idea of what computational thinking is. And then also this morning, if you're looking at the agenda, this morning I added a link for a graphic, an image that Claudia and Paula have worked on together that breaks down the different pieces of computational thinking and describes what they are. So what we thought we would start with is asking you to look at this definition from Jeanette Wing, and I'll put the link in the chat just in case you don't have it. And, you know, thinking about what does this definition mean to you and how does it fit with what the work you're doing? And from there, we'll go into everything else. So thinking about this definition, does this fit? Do you think this is something that makes sense, fits with the work you're doing? Can you see the work you're doing in this? What do people have to say? And feel free to unmute yourselves. And Marika, is there anything you want to add? No, okay.
I'll start. So part of what Claudia and I were talking about before is especially looking at this definition by Jeanette Wing, is that for younger children at least, to start with something that is not just the information processing agent, but how you have to sort of understand computational thinking without introducing the computer and that processing agent yet.
So the analog stuff, right? And I'm just going to take some notes. Anybody else can too. Feel free to add stuff. So what are some ways, maybe a thing to think about is like, you've been doing that, right? So you've been doing that, Paula, with the shoelace tying and the Pictionary and all those pieces. And Caitlin always reminds the team that the information processing agent doesn't have to be a computer, can be a person, can be a librarian, right?
I think that worked really well with the exercise that I had, right? Because the kids became sort of like the processing agent, where they were the ones reading the program, executed the program, and flipping the sponges. So I think it's just a way of like, okay, now that you have had this moment where you identify an information processing agent, how do you tie it back? How can you just like name it, right? Or recognize it, so to speak.
I'm now using shorthand. Information processing agent is IPA. Okay. Other thoughts about the definition? And, you know, one of the things the team always talks about is how, well, whether or not we need a definition that's our own for libraries, and if we can just use other definitions, and how we, I think, Paula, this relates to what you're saying too, is how important is it to have a definition for other people, right? So, like, do you use computational thinking when you talk about it? Or do you just, you know, do the activities and not worry about the labels?
I kind of feel like the labels are actually important depending on, it all depends on your audience and how deep academic in the language you need to get to really make the connection with the audience, because we've seen some, I mean, the same, I'm sorry that I keep going back to the Every Child Ready to Read framework. It's just the framework I know, but when discussing that, there are some families that you really go into how part of what you're just modeling is, you know, turning pages in a book, and that you know, each letter is connected to a sound, and each sound, you know what I mean, and all of those different pieces. some other people that you use phrases like phonological awareness, and you talk about, you know, print awareness. You know, do you have to use those higher words, because otherwise they don't think it has any value if it doesn't have that academic language attached to it. So I think that the trick is defining the academic language with everyday words, so that for some people, some families, you just talk about what it actually means. You just talk about the day-to-day work of it. And for other families, you have that background and you have that knowledge that you can go back to, you can refer back to. You know, it's for the parent of the 3-year-old who doesn't understand that their 3-year-old will never understand jokes because they're 3. You know, and you can say that because you know, he's 3, he's not going to get it. But until I start talking about brain chemistry and, you know, levels of abstraction and understanding words, you know what I mean? Like, they're not going to really make the connection. So.
And kind of building off what Paula said is that I also, that every child ready to read connection, but I think what's nice about the strategy Paula's talking about is that you insert the term, which may be new to people, but you explain it with natural language. And then those families, regardless of who the families are, regardless of whether it resonates with them immediately, they hear that phrase. So then the next time they hear it, whether it's in the media, in a news article, at a school, they can register, oh, I've heard that phrase before. We learned about that at the library. So even if they're not academically focused with their child's development or education, like, I think it's important, even if we're kind of afraid of these terms, to define them with natural language for everybody, even if it seems a little beyond the setting. And that's why I'm so glad we're talking about this, because I think if we can come to this general understanding of what the term means, it'll be easy for us to both use the term and explain it.
Actually, it might be good to look at, because you did that with the graphic you two made, Paula. So maybe let's look at that, and I'll have it on my screen and share it, and the link is also on the agenda. So let me just share my screen. And then, does everybody see it on the agenda? So you can link. Great, thanks. And here it is. So now you guys are seeing it, right? And so Claudia and Paula, do you want to talk a little bit about how and why of this?
I will jump in. So Paula and I last Friday, at the end of her day, spent about an hour kind of talking about how to talk about computational thinking. And at first we were trying to come up with a very natural language definition. And then we looked at some of the resources that Paula pointed out, which is the BBC and Barefoot, Coding or Computing, I can't remember what the term is. And we kind of looked at that, and then we thought, well, maybe the definition is pretty comfortable. We're pretty comfortable with that, and maybe it's how we present it. And so this is kind of the first iteration. And I made this up because I'm kind of working on it to go specifically to my library, but we thought that maybe pulling out these 4 parts and kind of including eventually anecdotes, and maybe this is really parallel to what the toolkit's doing, is anecdotes at different developmental stages. So kind of helping through these questions and the anecdotes, helping families understand what that really means. And so instead of just defining what each of those means in natural language, I tried to do a flip and use the questions. And then the box down in the bottom left, I used to equate to what kinds of programs we offer here at the library. And after we talked about this, I gave this to a parent that here at the library, and a couple of things she talked about. One was, you know, she knows what this is all about, but she said, you know, why computational thinking at the library? And number two, we talked about adding in activities like read, write, and play at the bottom there, because really computational thinking is used, you know, in collaborative play, in reading, and all those pieces, and that those terms kind of add that, that nice connection to other traditional pieces. The computational thinking piece, I said, you know, Paula had, I guess someone at her library was making the suggestion that instead of computational thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong, Paula, but maybe computational literacy. And when I suggested that to the parent, she said, well, yeah, of course, then there's this obvious connection to the library. And so, you know, maybe that's too much license with the term, but Paula, maybe you can talk about that a little bit, but it really resonated immediately with this parent.
I was going to type, but I'll just talk. Yeah, that was our marketing media person who was talking about how he was going to try to sell the program to newspaper people to come in and talk about it. And I'm not sure where he is in that process, but he was like, yeah, when I present this to other people, I'm going to call it computational literacy. And this was way back in October. And I kind of just looked at him and I was like, that's not actually the phrase. I guess you can talk about it, you know, I guess you can use it, but that's not what it's called. That's not what it is. So, but that is something to think about.
We've actually been saying computational thinking literacies or literacy. So you get the computational thinking in there and then literacy as a part of it. So thoughts or questions about this or ideas? Claudia and Paula and I were emailing earlier, and the other things to add to that kids learn computational thinking when they, or I'm giving you the chance to give Paula and Claudia feedback on this, but other kinds of things that this makes you think of?
I think that I like that. I mean, I like this one, but I also like that other one that somebody shared the other day, where there was like, it was the computational thinker, and it was like on one side was like the concepts, and in the other one side were the approaches to it, because it is just about, I think that when you engage in computational thinking exercise, you're also developing this sort of like approaches like tinkering or troubleshooting that are essential for you to achieve these kinds of concepts, right? And I'm also thinking that you need to like you can go a little deeper and then talk about like what are some of the things that you can use to like arrive at the competition in like do you know like how does loop, you know, how understanding a loop, for example, right, fits into this equation, right? Because you always talk, you know, working with loops or decision making or if statements, right? If I do this, then I do that. So how does that fit into it? It's like something that you need to narrow down or go a little to another level. So that's like my initial thoughts around this.
So Juan, you're thinking even within these groupings, like if I was going to modify this graphic, even almost like underneath the questions, just having little examples of how that might play out?
It might be, right? I'm just thinking that because there's like, I think that when I talk about computational thinking, I'm always talking about different aspects of it, right? Like, so these kinds of concepts that you have over here, but I'm also going a little bit like more like sort of like a details in terms of like, for example, like what I just talked about, like loops or if statements or variables or data, right? Data manipulation, right? Because that's like really key, right? How do I recognize or how, you know, a variable works, right? Because I think that, well, that's like a little bit more like in terms of like just more like deconstructing it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because I think like Jeanette Wing also has this article that's like when she talk about computational thinking, and she's talking in this high level concept. It's like how you think about like data scientist, or how do you think about like person that approaches problems through like this information processing thing, right? So it's like this sort of like high level concepts of you thinking in terms of like computation. But I also think that it's important to make these concepts accessible to other people that might not be so familiar with it, and then sort of like an entry point for them. Oh, okay, now I see what you're talking about.
This might be a good opportunity to talk about something else that Claudia and I talked about, which is how we present and talk about this with different ages and different levels, because what you do as a 5-year-old for computational thinking is different than what you do as a middle schooler. And sort of trying to think about how, if that age and like ability should be somewhere in this as well. Because I look at the other image that you were talking about, Juan, which I think is the barefoot CES one. And it doesn't, I really like that one as someone who knows something. I don't know how much this is going to help someone who is just being introduced to computational thinking. Like it feels like it has both too much and not enough information on it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think, you know, that when I was in that panel for Comic-Con, we went through this, and the team actually went over. I took one side, and then the team youth leader took the other side, and she went through each of these clouds and explaining what they meant and how they applied to what she had been doing, you know. So I think if you just present this graphic like this, it can be intimidating, but if you sort of like break it down for people, it can be really like eye-opening, right? Like, you know, persevering, right? Like if you get stuck on some program and then you debug it, so it's like about debugging, right? And how they relate to each other. Also, she's talking about how they all complement each other. So, but I hear you in terms of the audience, right? I mean, what do you do if you're talking to like management, for example, about your program?
There's definitely not one size fits all. And I think that's one of the things that the toolkit's going to help with too, is as we continue to build it, you know, thinking about where are you? Well, the framework asks you, where are you? And then also working with, talking to, etc., and being able to put together something that fits your needs and purposes. So I just wanted to look at a couple of the other questions that we had for you today, because we want to really think about, you know, how we do talk about this with other people, which are one of the things we're saying here. So do you have other suggestions? I think we've talked a bit about the kinds of things that would be in the toolkit, but what are you telling people? Like, what are you saying when you talk about the work you're doing? How are you describing it? How are you describing the why of what you're doing? And Marika's highlighting the why. But anybody?
Yeah, I want to know.
Go ahead.
I want to know how you justify, I guess might be the word, with administration or other people, like why libraries? Why are we doing CT in libraries?
Because I say so, it's a good idea.
I know, right? We all think it's a good idea.
No. I mean, I think I tie it also to like, I mean, I don't know. I have to dig and see what I've done, but I talk about a little bit about multiple literacies, right? And then also about demands that you have, like in the world now, and how computing is part of our daily lives all the time, and how we need to prepare people to understand, right, how that affects your development. I mean, I have to look into more stuff.
So how come libraries are not, I don't know, Boys and Girls Clubs or the classroom?
Because I think that libraries have a commitment to serve the communities, right? And the access, libraries are in a great position because communities tend to convene around libraries, right? Like, and then serving those communities in things that are relevant right now are part of public services in a library.
Can I jump in on this one? Can you hear me? I couldn't hear me. So this is like the easiest part, like when I say advocating for this, because it all comes back to resources, and that's something that a lot of people can understand is libraries provide resources, and we fill in the gaps across the board in our communities. But when we talk about resources, one thing when I explain to people why we do what we do is that they're useless if people don't understand them. So with resources, we also teach literacy, so that people can then use the resources. It's not enough to just give it to them and then walk away. So in explaining it in those terms, people understand why libraries get involved. We have all this stuff, but you need to know how to actually use it.
Hey, hello.
We can hear you, Cheryl.
Okay. Good. I had to, when we first got the grant, I had to go in front of the city council and talk about it and talk about why, it was the library and why we're doing computational thinking. And I brought it up in terms of the workforce needs that are around our community is going to be in, computer science related fields. And the idea was the more frequency that a youth got, in touch with these sorts of principles like computational thinking at an early age and is reinforced throughout, their age and their learning, that it becomes something that's familiar for them and something that's comfortable for them. Even if they don't go into, let's say, a direct coding sort of field, they'll be somewhere around the industry and it'll be something that's familiar to them. Also, libraries are, a place of lifelong learning to learn and understand new things that they might not be able to get access to, especially in a community like Santa Ana, which is, large minority population, large population that don't have access to computers. It can be really daunting, and presenting computational thinking as a way to, you may not go into this, but you can think like a coder, and also kind of reinforce that this is something you're already doing. You're already naturally thinking like this when you, maybe pick up a musical instrument, or when you bake a cookie, you break it down for them into something that's a common everyday process. So it's just something I feel like, libraries have a special place because we get kids from the time they're toddlers all the way to they're older. So we can really reinforce a lot of these things that are out there in the industry and in the community.
The other side of it, I would say, for the other side of it for at least our position, and part of what I was thinking about when we created this program, is that the DC public library system, or at least me and my library, we're not in a position to provide material like computers, you know what I mean, and other sort of mess around with material, new or emerging, even older stuff. We're very, we're sort of limited with material items, but what we can do is create situations for kids to be exposed to and build those computational thinking skills, the critical thinking skills, so that when our people are introduced to and start interacting with computers and doing things like Scratch and whatnot, they already have the right mindset, thinking skills to look at that and say, oh, this is decomposition. What they're asking me here is to break this into steps. And they already sort of know what that looks like theoretically and in other ways that they can then transfer those skills to new and different areas.
I also think that in terms of like equity is also important in the position that the library has into providing these kinds of concepts and service that otherwise are not accessible for underrepresented communities, right? So we are embedded in communities of low resources, and bringing these kinds of opportunities is key, right, for them.
So I'm gonna push, I agree with what everybody's saying, but I think what's hard is that the language we use is us, like libraries are this, and we understand that. So I'm wondering how someone might say this to someone who isn't necessarily a lover of libraries or understands the role of the library in community, because I think that's where the real challenge is. Or somebody knows the library, provides resources, and that's what we've always done, and we're about youth and free and all that. Awesome, but how do we tell someone who's just like, why do we have a library today, right? They're not library users, they're not necessarily library supporters, they don't even have the nostalgia, which is a lot of what people have about libraries. So what do we say to them?
One of the things I usually do, it's not specific to this, but I like to tell people that the best thing about the library is that you can try things. There's no commitment, there's no monetary investment. You get to play. Even as an adult, you get to come in, you get to try something. If you don't like it, you know what I mean? All you did was waste, however long it took you to figure out you don't like it. If you do like it, you can figure out other ways to, dig into that, be it in the library or outside. But that is one of the great things that the library does, is provide you an opportunity to sort of be and try new things. I would also say, though, that I don't know if libraries in general do a very good job engaging non-library users in the non-library population. So it's sort of interesting to think about it that way, too.
Anybody else? Or Marika, go. You're about to say something. Go.
You knew I was going to say something. So I think I'm building on what Linda and Paula are saying, but if you're talking to other groups or entities that do this, what is well, we kind of answered it. I'm looking at the notes, I've been typing bullet notes, but what is unique that the library does that you don't find elsewhere? And what I think I'm hearing is it's around kind of the core library values thing, like equity and access and lifelong learning and those kinds of things. Is that, can you really boil it down, or can one, not you guys, but can one really boil it down to it fits within core library values and it's kind of an extension of those in a way? Or is there something else that's unique about libraries in CT compared to other stuff that libraries do, right? Did I say that okay?
Yes, but I'm going to push back on you, Marika. You're used to, but I think that is it. But I think that core library values don't matter to anyone else. I mean, they
No,
do.
you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. I'm trying to move our core library values into plain English for non-library users.
Perfect. Got it.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly right.
I think to answer your question, and hopefully I don't get pushback from Linda, is that one libraries, I probably will. One thing that libraries offer that's different, because I get this a lot too, like, why don't you leave it to the school system, like what they can learn in education, and we offer choice, and we are exploratory, we aren't testing them. They come in and they do, and they interact how they want to interact, and there's no pressure, there's no grading, they're free to explore and take it in whatever direction they want, which is very different from the school setting.
No pushback.
Yeah, but also that complement also of informal learning spaces, right? Because the library is a space where it's informal learning, right? So it sort of like works with the formal learning spaces as a complement and continue, right? Like, and then back to connected learning where the learning happens, right? It's all that. But then who are these people you're talking to that don't understand core values of library or the role of libraries in communities? And why is it important to talk to them and convince them? You know, who are they and why do you do this? Linda?
The fact that people can see my face is also, well, but Juan, like, isn't that, so I don't know if you're asking that seriously. Are you saying, like, who are those people and why would we want to talk to them?
No, I mean, I'm asking seriously, but like, okay, so you're talking about creating this language for people who are familiar. Are you thinking of, like, you have to talk to business partners who can support this work? Are you talking about politicians who are not familiar? Who is this audience, and maybe, you know, what role are they playing in this work?
Right. I think that's part of the thing, is like we have to figure out who these different audiences are. It goes back to what you and Paula and Claudia were saying before, is, you know, there's different audiences for explaining what CT is, and we go about it a different way, right? So it could be a legislator, it could be a youth development person, it could be someone who, a parent, you know, it could be a teacher, it could be a kid. But the way that people think about libraries is very different than the way people who work in libraries. And Cheryl, I'm going to call you out just because I think we saw that when Marika, Nikki, and I were fortunate enough to go to your library and see, like, what the youth and others are doing there. Is they have a view of libraries because they're so embedded in it and they're community members. I don't know, I'm going off topic.
Yeah, they are, and you know, and they are the ones that advocate for the library, and they go out into the community and they serve the community. So it's kind of like a long range thing of embedding and building our library advocates. And a lot of it, the goal for us with our young adult programming is, the idea is that they come to the library and they learn about library resources, but then they go out and share it with other organizations and other youth serving organizations and other community agencies, that, you know, the library is there for you to get resources, library is there for you to learn. So it's really sort of, our library is just the place really for lifelong learning, and, you know, the place where everybody's welcome and it's a safe space. So it's really a whole, you know, concerted plan really was to raise and grow and empower library advocates who are not just in the library, but also involved in different parts in the community. And it's like 10 years down the road and it's happening. They're doing it.
Right, so maybe we need to do the same thing with CT, right? Have others get the message across who speak a different language.
Exactly. The goal is not to the goal is not for the librarians, because we can go and we learn in our community that we can go and say everything about ourselves, we're amazing, but it doesn't really hit or resonate with community members or council members or business members until it's someone that was from the library, who is our believer, who goes out there and says, I haven't been back there, but that's where I learned how to do this, that's where I learned how to do that, so that is going to be more powerful. And then with, I think, the people that are in there in the programs, the goal is to teach them, hey, this is something we have in our library, and share it with other people, even if down the road that this is something you can come back and you can find that we're going to be doing something different. So I think that's the goal, is to try to get people who use the library, community people who use the library, to speak up for the library.
All right, well, we are running out of time. Marika, do you have anything to add to this before we just do our few minutes of open Q&A?
No, I guess yes, not no. It's that it's like two audiences. One is Paula and other people have talked about working with staff, additional staff, like to put this in other branches and things like that. So how do you message to the staff? And then how do you message to these non-library users? And I think also going to like our phase 2 work with the faculty, how do we talk about libraries and CT to LIS faculty is another audience that we're thinking about, right? That's the team's been thinking about recently. So anyway, that's all.
Okay, this is the last thing I'm gonna say. But I think that they shouldn't be separate, right? I think that when you begin to educate, or when the library staff becomes familiar and becomes to embrace CT, they are the ones who are going to help with the community and those people that are not so familiar with this, right? So you're sort of like creating this ecosystem, right, that is going to help you to make the library take this role of being in this CT world.
I'm going to push back against that a little bit, Juan, just because I think that there are
they'll push back.
Because there is specific language that, at least I can speak for myself, that I need to use when talking to other library staff, that ties what this work is into our strategic plan, the overarching goal of services, all of those, the library framework that we are supposed to be referencing back to, that I would never ever use when I'm talking to anyone else, even in a different library system, because it's not going to apply to them and it's not going to matter to them.
Yeah, they can actually, but then if they become familiar with this, they are gonna, like, for example, I have a librarian at South Park who has become so familiar with this work that now she can take these conversations to the community she worked with, and she's working with like the schools in South Park, with community partners. So she's becoming the spokesperson, because already we did the work with her internally. That's what I'm saying, not that we use different language, but that they can become the agent that can help you to push this work forward.
Totally. We see shaking heads. Okay, we are basically out of time, but are there any questions about what's going on, what you need, any of that? No? I see shaking heads. Yes, and Paula, that makes sense. Conversation starts at a different place. The only thing is, next week, I think we're going to start talking about assignments to go with the timeline and some of the activities, and have you start signing up for things. So that will be part of our conversation next week. Here, Marika, anything to add? No? All right. Thanks all. Thanks for a great conversation. Glad we got to talk about it. Have a good day.
Bye. Thank you.